Welcome back to the Global Business Report here on Arise News. Seeing the big scoop from this day newspaper, Nigeria's newspaper of record, right above the masthead, of course, the tweet talks about, there it is, after rebasing, NBS puts headline inflation at 24.48 in January from 34.8 in December. That December figure was actually at a 30-year high. And there it is. So we picked out the figures. You can see January 2024, December 2024, and what the figures in January 2025 look like after the rebasing, according to some exclusive reporting from this day newspaper. Let's bring in Professor Uche Uwaleke, Professor of Capital Markets at the Nasarawa State University, Keffi, and also President of the Capital Market Academics of Nigeria. Professor, thank you so much for joining us. So, look, starting with headline inflation, we've seen that table there. So December was a 30-year high, rebasing taking it to 24.48. What is your reaction?
Yeah, thanks so much, Rotus. I saw another headline today that says inflation rate drops from 34.8% in January to 24.8% in February. I don't think that's an accurate representation of what has happened. What has happened is purely a change in methodology, and I think the whole idea is to capture a lot more accurately the inflationary pressure that we have in the country today, and that's why you're having a rebased CPI. Rebasing is nothing other than updating the price and weight reference periods. As you are aware, the current price and reference weight and base periods we are using is that of 2009. So since 2009, we've not had any change in in methodology, and this is something that ought to happen every 5 years, and we are in 2025. So I think it's a good thing that NBS has done this. It took a lot of work, to the best of my knowledge, and as I said, it's all geared towards making our CPI numbers largely comparable, globally, and also accurately reflecting, the inflationary pressure. Now, I talked about the base periods. Okay, the CPI manual, talks about ensuring that when you're rebasing, your price reference period is as close to the current year as possible. As a matter of fact, it talks about the year before. And that's why today we have in the new rebased number, the price reference period as 2024, okay? And the weight reference period as 2023. 2023, essentially because much of the data that is, to the best of my knowledge, MBS gathered, they gathered in 2023. That's talking about the Nigerian Living Standard Survey. That was done in 2023. And then that's also justification for having the weight reference period of 2023. For the price reference period, they now have it as 2024. Again, as I said, in line with the international manual. And again, taking into cognizance the fact that in 2023, we had this shock from the twin reforms, the unification of exchange rates and the fuel subsidy removal. So the immediate impact of the shocks, we had them more in 2023 than in 2024. So it made sense, therefore, to have the price reference period, as 2024. So when you take that into consideration, and you also take into consideration some of the enhancement in the methodology, coming from, say, the digitization of prices as opposed to what currently obtains now, picking the thing on paper, coming from the expansion, even in the product varieties. Currently, the product varieties, 740, basket of commodities, now 934. Okay, and even in the improvement in the classification, what MBS calls classification of individual consumption according to purpose, the COI cup. The COI cup we have been using all this while has been COI cup of 1999, based on 12 divisions. But today there is an upgrade in that classification to the 2018 version, which is what they have used in this methodology. So I think overall, it is all meant to reflect, as I mentioned, as I harped on earlier, current realities, and that's why you also find that even in the COI cup, arrangement, the weights too have been adjusted.
Perfect. So thanks for mentioning the weights. We have that table looking at some of the adjustments in the weights that have been made. Now, food inflation, of course, rebased now to be at 26.08%. It was 39.84. Prof, let me ask you about the old weights for food and non-alcoholic beverages at the very first row there. So from 51.8% to a weight now of 40. Yes, it is still, of course, the largest weight in the basket for koi cups, as you've mentioned. What's your reaction to that adjustment? Because it has been reduced essentially, even though it's still the largest weight.
Yeah, you're very correct, Rotus. You see, part of what you find there is a realignment again based on the survey that was done by the MBS. You look at the reduction in the weight, allocated to food from 51, nearly 52% to 40, and that's more because you also find that according to that modern or up-to-date classification, meals away from home, okay, the ones people eat in restaurants have now been removed from the food, classification that's division 01, and then moved to division 011. So the meals away from home was removed from there and taken to restaurants, and that's why you find in that classification the weight for restaurant has jumped, remarkably, astronomically, from 1.2 to over 12%. So it was taken to that category. The same thing applies to, if you also notice housing, housing too dropped. And that's also partly because the housing expenditure with respect to educational students, for example, across all educational levels, has also been moved from that division to the education. You also notice education increased, okay, health increased. Right? So as opposed to the 12 classifications, we now have 13 classifications. So the realignments is what has led to that drop in food. And that's why you find the recent number, the food inflation component is just, I think, 26%, while the headline inflation is, 24.5%, or thereabout. So I think what we have now, as I said, is something that at least is comparable, with what obtains internationally, because they have used international standards, in doing what they're doing. And if you also notice, they've also added a number of indices to further enhance the methodology and further influence decision making on the part of government. Because the whole idea behind this macro figure we have is for decision making, particularly on the part of the monetary authority. So you see they've added some other indices like imported food index. They've also added the farm produce index. They've added services index. They've added energy index. So all of that, will go a long way to improve decisions around inflation and macro variables in general.
Thanks, Prof. Thank you for actually mentioning the decision makers. We have the Monetary Policy Committee meeting kicking off tomorrow, concluding on Thursday. What do you expect? There are some whispers there might be a hold. And as far as decision making is concerned, how does this, rebasing, I guess, impact the outlook of the central bank for inflation, and also, academia like yourself and investors? Very briefly, if you can.
Yes, of course, inflation is one number that investors are always after. You want to invest, you're looking at the inflation figure because you are interested in a positive real rate of return. And particularly so, people ask me, what's the whole idea behind this? Isn't this just maybe an academic exercise? It doesn't have any impact on the people. But I see it from that point of view, from the point that an international investor and a foreign investor may be looking at also inflation, and domestic investors are also considering inflation to invest in Nigeria. So when the inflation number reflects more accurately the inflationary pressure, of course, it will put them in a position to take a decision. Today, the MPR is at 27.5%, and with this inflation rate coming in at 24.5 thereabout, that simply means that in terms of real interest rates, it has turned the corner. We now have positive real interest rates, and that can also influence, investment decision. Okay, so for the MPC that is coming, I expect them to hold the rates. I expect the members to hold the rates, and that's because even with the old methodology, there was also the expectation that January inflation, would moderate. Okay, that we had the peak. The general impression was that we had the peak in December, and by January it will moderate. So my expectation is that the rates will be held, and going further into the year, I also, especially with the target of 15% that we'll have in the 2025 budget, and with, if you like, risks to inflation, downside risks to inflation, also moderating, I expect that before the year runs out, the central bank will also change its monetary policy stance, possibly from the current tightening to maybe possibly losing.
All right.
For us in the academia, of course, we use that a lot in research. We are interested in the trend, and I also expect that the MBS will also generate figures by way of backtracking, generate figures that will enable researchers conduct this without having a significant distortion for 2025.
Professor Uwaleke, we appreciate your insights as always. Thank you so much for your time. There, of course, from Nasarawa State University. You're watching a Global Business Report here on Horizon News.